And welcome back, dweebs, to a special episode. Danny is here with me once again. Welcome back, sir. We are here to talk Late Night with the Devil, a horror movie close to both of our hearts at this point. But Danny, I'll hand it off to you. A, how are you? And B, what was your experience with this little indie horror film?
I'm great. To answer your first question, doing great. Happy to be here. But what was your second question? How did I?
What was your experience with this movie? You know, is it for me? I heard this. A bunch of reviews went out on YouTube that were talking about the movie, and I was like, "Wow, I'm seeing this movie pop up all of a sudden," and it happened to be on Shudder. So I watched it on Shudder. Was this one you caught in the theater? Where did you have your eyes on this one?
I bought it.
Oh,
I ended up buying it. Well, how it went down for me really is I kept seeing, like you were saying, reviews and whatnot. But I don't even think I really saw a trailer. I think I just saw people talking about it. And then immediately, really, what dragged me to, purchasing it or whatever, watching it, was how it looked. I mean, it's Late Night with the Devil, so you expect a certain thing, but they really did like the what is it? It's supposed to be like 70s, I think.
Yep.
But it looks like fucking Carson or whatever, back in the day, like something like that. It looks just like you jumped back to that time and you're watching it, and there's something about that aesthetic that lends to the creepiness, I think, of it. Like, I don't know what it is exactly about just it being an older vibe there, but something about, I don't know. It immersed me more and made it feel more believable almost, even though that doesn't make any real sense. It's not like the devil was, he was around back in the 70s. He's left us at this point.
Well, depending on other YouTube channels, he's alive and well. You can see him at every Super Bowl halftime show, believe it or not. So who's to say? I do agree with you, though, on that aesthetic. That was one of the things that drew me to the movie as well. Big fan. I grew up watching this stuff, late night TV. Not as much of a thing anymore, but there was a time where it was probably on everyone's television late every single night. So it was definitely a throwback nostalgia feel. And I love the way it was framed, where you had sort of the behind the scenes cameras where you stuck with the action. And that's where, you have some people that complained about it, and we're still in the spoiler free portion of the program, guys. So if you haven't watched the movie yet, you can still hang out with us for now. But, for me, I view this as an analog horror film more than, like a found footage. I know they had that. I thought they stayed with pretty well within the framing device overall, but that's what hooked me as well, Danny, was just the idea of, oh, it's a hidden, missing media of an old 70s broadcast where there's an exorcism, because we've seen the exorcism thing done a million times too, right?
I'm really attracted to the whole like found footage thing. Like, I'll give a movie a chance just because of that, honestly. I can remember back in the day, like when I was a teenager or like growing up, when I'd want my mom to go see like the original Cloverfield or whatever with me. And she's like, and she says no, first off, but then I go with like a friend and another mom. And that mom's like, I can't do it. It's the shakiness. It's the weirdness of that cam. I can't do found footage. So I understand why some people can't do the found footage thing, though I like it. I do feel like it's the same but different vibes when it comes to this. Like, it's not obviously the shaky cam of it all, blah, 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 but it's found footage. It's just professionally done footage. You know what I mean? Like, it's
produced found footage,
right.
Not it's more what did they call that with the Waldens? It's not quite Marble Hornets, you know, the Slender Man found footage YouTube series from back in the day that we probably all love. It's more of a I really wish I could remember. Well, the Walden Files, maybe that's what it was called. But it's sort of where you have these produced. You see some Five Nights at Freddy's stuff, some fan videos that are made in that same style, where it's found footage, but it's almost like the footage itself is haunted. And that's
Right.
kind of a similar vibe that we get with the things that go on in the set and a lot of the Easter eggs, which we will talk about once we pass the spoiler threshold. But yeah, I thought the framing of it, it stayed within it well enough that even in the breaks, right in between the, you know, when they're on commercial break, it felt like that all made sense. You know, it wasn't so immersion breaking, you know, where I'm like, oh, why would there be a camera on? Like, why is the producer mic'd up? Like, that doesn't make any sense, actually. It's just like, oh, okay. You know,
It
maybe they're
felt
just
natural. I agree.
yeah, they're doing the behind the scenes thing, and it really allowed those scenes are what gave you so many of these Easter eggs and like the hints that make this movie so much more enjoyable upon a rewatch. Because I don't know, that's my next question for you while we're still here. Spoiler freeville. I found that this was a movie I enjoyed it so much the first time, but I really enjoy it more upon rewatching. I may get to a point here, you know, where you oversaturate it, but there've been so many little clues and fun things to find. I thought it was better the second time around. How did you feel about it?
So today would have been my second viewing of it. And I, it's interesting. Like, I'm not tired of it, and I will eventually I'll watch it again. But honestly, I found it just naturally watching it the second time. I was just back in it again. Like, I didn't even think about going like, oh, I need to pay attention to something that happens here, something that he says here. Like, I'm kind of thinking about that because it is my second viewing. So some parts of the movie, naturally, you know, I'm able to like, okay, you know, this and that's going on. But most of the time I was just in it again. I'm just back in it again.
That it's funny you said that because it happened to me as well. This was it might have been my fourth viewing. It was definitely my at least my third. And the reason I wanted to watch it one more time was because on that second viewing, I caught a few things, but I didn't write them all down. And I wanted to go back one more time and specifically pay attention to everything on the outside and try to look for it. But I failed, Danny. I got 15 minutes into the movie and was like, oh, I need to restart. I was supposed to be looking for stuff. And I had a couple things that I remembered specifically, but not well enough for me to write it down as a note for this episode. And I wanted to get those details so that way when we talk about all that stuff, I could say, oh, and in this exact moment, this exact thing pops up. You can go look at it for yourself.
Right.
But I got immersed in the intro again, and I was like, "Shit, there was stuff I was supposed to be looking for. I got to go back." And I did find them, but yeah, it. I would agree with that. It did a great job of bringing you back in. I think the way they set the tone, it does that very well. You know, where they have that intro with the narration. You know, where they set the scene. And they have the different footage of things going on. And light spoilers here in the set. Well, we're talking about the first 5 minutes of the movie, but you know, they have all that footage, and he's kind of saying it's the 70s, and all this horror is being broadcast into homes worldwide because it was kind of a new phenomenon then, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like what we're dealing with now with Twitter and everything being 24/7. We can see all these weird tragedies in on our cell phone. You know, during our lunch break, it was just as jarring for people back then to be like, holy shit, it's a big old world and Ted Bundy's in it. This is wild, dude. And now there are people that worship Satan. So it sets this tone of the 70s were a wild time, man, and it's about to get really weird in here.
What's that old radio thing that they pulled the trick on people where they like played a segment where it was like aliens were attacking? and people that were listening to it on the radio thought it was real.
Yeah, so I think it was Orson Welles doing the voiceover. They did an
Oh,
audio
right.
play of the War of the Worlds, and people thought that it was a real broadcast, that aliens had really invaded America. And yeah, chaos ensued. So yeah, there have been a few different times where
It's funny. It's funny to think about, more people probably freaked out about that back then than people did when our president just got shot in the side of his fucking head.
probably, yeah. Yeah, you're probably right.
The level of like, the levels change, man. The levels really change in terms of like people's reaction to these kind of things. You can see how desensitized we've become over the years.
I think that's why the setting worked so well. I think that's a good point. If you set this in 2020, it doesn't really feel out of place. But the idea that, here's this guy running a show up against Carson, somebody who, even if you don't know much about TV history, you've heard the name, you probably know that was the king of late night. So you understand quickly. Here's a guy who's probably got to do every single thing. I feel like Chris Hansen. Here's a guy that is doing everything he can to surpass Johnny Carson, including, no, I'm sorry. I have the chats here, Jack. But so it's really fitting in that time, because there was a bit of that sensationalism, but there are more people, and throughout all the characters, it makes a lot more sense because they're more wholesome. They're more like, what the hell is going on? Like, I love Gus. Gus is meant to be the audience insert, I believe, right? Gus is the dude who's like, dude, just stop, bro.
The sidekick,
quit.
the Andy Richter. And he's funny throughout the whole thing too, for sure.
Yeah, he's so good. And so I guess, we've got a nice little warm up here. I think it's probably about time to break. Okay, you got something?
I will tell you, I will say a few things before we get into spoilers. I just figure we can get it out of the way without being spoilery. First, what I wanted to say, which would have probably been a good thing to start on, I didn't think of it at first, but really kind of when I first watched this, and then when I first talked to you about wanting to talk about this movie, I thought it's kind of Clout Route related, like sort of, because how I feel with the Clout Route is like we're doing a live show. It's not like obviously it's not like a fucking late night show, but when I think about like us doing a live show, like that is where my brain would naturally went. I mean, it always is. Like, that's what I grew up on to like seeing, is like, late night shows went like that. And those late night guys were kind of trying to do the same thing that we're doing, cracking jokes and showing you like timely news and stuff. And like, it really is a very similar thing. So when I saw the horror movie, that I haven't got to see a horror movie in such a long time either, so that was exciting. But when I saw the horror movie that had this like late night edge to it, I was like, it is kind of like, I would love to have a creepy episode with Kevin where we pull the wool over the Clout Routers. Imagine that. But see, nobody would believe this. You were right with what you said. Like, the setting in the 70s works for this, because if it was now, people would know that it's just this is some TikTok meme, or this is some guy's dumbass Kick stream where they're faking all this bullshit. Like, nobody would believe that this kind of thing could go down in like present day time. So
they'd all be Carmichael. They'd all be pressing X to doubt.
Yep. So I thought the Clout Route of it all did resonate here with me a little bit, just because of the late night thing. But the other thing that I wanted to bring up, I guess it's kind of spoiler free. Did you hear the controversy that they had around the film?
That's right. Yes. I assume we're thinking about the same one, the AI controversy.
The AI. Yeah. Like something we frequently talk about, I guess, over on the Clout Route. So I thought that was interesting too, that the funny thing about it was I'm watching the movie for the first time with my wife. And when those images popped up, immediately I says, that kind of looks like fucking AI images. Like, this is before I knew anything about it, you know? And I says to my wife, that kind of looks like AI images. Like, what's up with that? That's like, if somebody actually drew that they're using AI images to draw their images because it looks just too much like an AI image. And she looked it up while we were watching, like, are those AI images in the thing? And of course, sees all of the controversy then. And I was like, oh, interesting.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. The controversy side of it, I find to be pretty interesting too, because I think we're talking about 3, maybe 4 still. Like it's
right
when they come out of commercial break, right? Like they're just
it's
still
just
images.
like the waiting screens or whatever. There's like 3 or 4 of them that are like, they're Halloween themed even. Like one's a skeleton and one's like a pumpkin or whatever.
Like one's just a TV that says Night Owls inside it. Stuff that, you know, you could probably do in Canva,
but it is interesting how you can, if you're familiar with the AI at this point, like we are, you can spot it. There is a certain, like, it has a certain glaze to it almost. Like, I don't know what it is about an AI image, but it has some sort of finish over the whole thing where you're like, you can just kind of spot that it really wasn't, you know, it's a fake, it's a generated image. I don't know what it is. It's uncanny, I guess. The uncanny valley shit.
Yeah, and you know, maybe it's easier for us because we do play around with a lot of AI imagery, you know, with different Clout Route bits, and I've used it before for coming up with podcast logo ideas. But yeah, it sticks out. It feels like you know, just early CGI, you know, or when you could kind of, as a film fan, when you watch a lot of movies growing up, you can point out like, oh, look, that's a green screen, or like, oh, like that's a painting, dude. They're not doing any of this stuff. Like this is, and you're just like, oh wow, cool. I can kind of see through. I can see behind the curtain there for a second. But I found the whole situation to be interesting because on one hand, you're watching a movie that takes about 2 whole minutes to start because of all of the different production companies that all had animated intros, by the way. All of their bumpers had music, animation, all of that stuff. So it was odd to think that to save a little money on the budget, you're just going to use AI for these images. You would think one of these 12 people had somebody. Was that all AI done? You know, did they all generate even their own company logo? So it was a little weird. It felt like it was an unnecessary risk to take, you know, because it got some negative publicity to a film that otherwise I think would have gotten only positive feedback as far as being a, you know, not everybody will like it, but I think people would appreciate the effort put into it and what they were going for and the aesthetic, all that good stuff. But then you have 4 AI generated images, and I just wonder how much money did you save? Because it is an independent film. You know, we are talking about really the last remaining pillar of any sort of film independent. Like that's why we gotta stay watching these horror movies, because if you ever care about shit like Borderlands 2 not being the only types of movies you can watch, just poorly thought out corporate bullshit, you just be a horror fan, because that's the only place indie film exists anymore. But it sucks when they resort to an AI image. So you noticed it immediately, not even necessarily being aware of it. Did it do anything for you? Like, were you bummed out to see that? Do you understand where they're coming from as an independent person, you know, independent artist yourself? Or like, did it take you out of it at all? Well, maybe a little bit, sounds like.
It took me out enough that I noticed it, obviously. I think it's a very, like I said, if you're familiar with it, I mean, you're not going to see that and not notice. Like, I didn't even it wasn't even, like I said, it was my first viewing, first off. And I wasn't, I even said it with my second viewing. I was so into it that I couldn't even pick up the, you know, the subtleties. So the first time, certainly, it's like it didn't take me out to where I was like, oh, God, you know, what the hell did they do here? I definitely noticed it. How do I feel about it though? It's interesting. Like, as a movie, it's different. It's like you got the small chin up there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, dude. Good
It's
old
like,
Dave.
yeah. Can I make an excuse for you, even as an indie film? You know, trying to save on the budget, to not get 4 images together that aren't AI. I mean, like shit. Even I don't know. I guess AI is the easier way to do it, but you don't even necessarily have to pay somebody extra to do it. It's like you could get somebody that's already working on the film and just say, "Hey, you got a couple seconds to fucking seconds." I mean, just depends on, I guess, how in depth they went. But these images also were just stills for the commercial break. Like they weren't.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything like earth shattering. They didn't need. They could have paid somebody for their time to do it, I think. Do I think that it means don't watch the movie because they used AI for a couple of things? No, they paid tons of people, worked well, and did good things with tons of people. Like the whole production doesn't, you don't get the middle finger to everybody that worked hard on the thing just because somebody decided to cut some corners with some AI images. I do think that it's worth mentioning because if you, especially for a movie like this, where all in all, good things. Okay, so it's not like it's being unfairly, judged here because of the AI images.
No
Like
review
people,
bombing. Yeah,
right?
that we
People
know of.
liked it, whatever. So I think it is valid to point it out because then it keeps people honest. You know, people are going to notice. Okay, the viewers are going to notice, and they're not going to like it. Apparently, you know what I mean. And this time it was only this much of it, but the next time they see it in a bigger budget movie or in a different situation where they've used more AI than this instance did or whatever, I would like people to be there to be like, hey, what the fuck? Like you gotta like we're trying to pay creatives to do their creative thing, not this fucking AI to steal everybody's shit. So there's a little bit of both, but I don't think that this film is necessarily hindered or worse or needs to be judged any harsher because of the use of the AI. I just thought it was kind of interesting that they got shit, and I noticed.
I agree with you. And the one thing, I guess the downside, the bummer to it all is, as we've already talked about, they did such a good job of making it feel like a real late night 1970s TV set. I've even seen people who don't like the movie complain that it felt too much like watching a TV show. I think to certain people on the set, like that's the best praise you could get, right? Like, because that's what you were going for.
Right.
And so to use modern AI to just sort of break the fourth wall a little bit was a bit of a letdown. But again, everything Danny said, I would echo it. It's sort of like you wish it wasn't there so you could just focus on the craftsmanship and talk about what did and didn't work in the story. But then you have this thing hanging out here. It's not nearly as egregious as a company like Disney doing it for their horrible Scrolls show, where it's like,
right.
dude, I don't want to hear that you guys don't have the money. I know you
Right.
do, you scumbags. This is one where it's like, I'm willing to look the other way because for all we know, one of our favorite practical death scenes, they were able to afford that because they didn't pay an extra graphic designer to, when it's thinner margins and stuff like that, whatever. I'm willing to forgive it, as Danny said. But yeah, it's just, you just really wish it wasn't there. Part of me looks forward to maybe this thing, if it's sold enough copies, they get a chance to re-release it and just replace that with something. At this point, you probably have enough fan art where you wouldn't need to pay that much for it, right? Like,
right, pay a fan to do it.
Yeah, pay a fan for something they've already drawn, and because I'm sure there were plenty of people who are willing to prove that they were better than the AI. I bet we could go to Twitter and find some of this stuff. But I agree with you on that. Did you have any other spoiler-free topics before we cross the threshold?
I don't have any other spoiler-free, but I do have one to hit you with right at the top of spoilers if you'd want me to.
We are getting ready for Spoiler Town. I would just say this one last thing in case we have folks that genuinely haven't watched it and want to. Danny, would you recommend this to someone who hasn't watched it yet?
Yes, I would. I would say go ahead. Um, I'm trying to think of a reason like you wouldn't enjoy it. Honestly, I think that everything is well done. I think the immersion is there. You're going to be in it. I don't even think it is too scary.
Agreed.
Which maybe would be like, I don't know, if you're looking for a horrific, like shit your pants movie, then this isn't the one. It's creepy. It's got good use of the staples, the horror, the gore, whatever, but it's not really scary. I watched it with my wife, who notoriously hates horror films. This is the first horror film that I've gotten to watch besides like Chucky, if you count that, in decades. You know what I mean? Like I'm not one to, I don't get to indulge in that very often, but it was the mix of everything with this one. How I was like telling my wife how into the aesthetic I was. I was like, the late night thing is so cool and it looks so cool. Kind of looks creepy with some of the imagery and stuff too. And I convinced her to do it. So like my wife also loved it as a person that doesn't like horror films. So if that tells you anything too, not only did I like it, my wife, not necessarily into this kind of thing, also enjoyed it.
Yeah, I agree. And just to echo that while we're here, I think it was a good slow burn. Like Danny said, it's more creepy at times, not jump scare heavy or anything like that. It's really focused on telling you a creepy story. And it felt a lot like, I don't know, just like reading a mystery novel at times too, just because of the way the information is parsed out to you. I think you can enjoy this without trying to piece the whole thing together, but there is so much extra content for you there if you are kind of along for the ride, like, oh, what the hell is going on here? Like if you start out as a skeptic like Carmichael, there are plenty of pieces of evidence to prove who's a fake, who's being real, and there's a lot of cool stuff there. So if you like more of a slow burn, maybe it's I don't even know if I want to call it a thriller, because even those tend to have a little maybe more of a rapid pace, but
right,
it's more about building the tension over time than it is about jumping out and scaring you. There is definitely some gore impacts throughout it, but it's not something that's leaning heavily into that. It's not like a Saw film or anything like that, but it has enough visual intrigue to be like, oh wow, okay, like the prop guys got to do some cool things here. A lot of the effects were cool. So I also would recommend it. I think if you are a fan of the Shudder platform, that's a pretty cheap, as far as streaming apps go, pretty cheap one. You can probably get a free trial for a month. You can go watch it on Shudder. Danny bought it. I'm going to buy it at some point. This is definitely a movie that I will own on Blu-ray. So whatever that means to you, if you've watched our other stuff, you know how much I love horror movies. So you've got Danny's stamp of approval, his non-horror fan wife's stamp of approval, and mine. And with that one, guys, we will slide into Spoiler City. So if you haven't watched it, we bid you adieu. If you're like me and sometimes you just actually want to have a movie spoiled for you and have people talk about it and convince you that it is worth watching, then hell yeah, you can stick around with us too. We'll run through the plot. We'll let you know what's going on. But we are full on spoilers from here on out. And I'll pass it back to you, Danny, because you said you had something for us here to start off the spoiler section. What you got, brother?
I almost said this in the not spoilers because I wasn't really sure, but I figured it's a good one to open up the spoilers with. The thing that I didn't notice, which it's not that I didn't notice, it's just like I didn't piece it together as much the first time as the second time, is the cult kind of aspect of it. The Bohemian Grove fucking cult thing in there. Like once you see the whole thing in its entirety and you're starting to piece the puzzle together as to like what exactly happened on that night, you know, the cult thing kind of will pull that all together for you if you put that in the mix. But I didn't realize that there was like a culty aspect of it. Like I didn't I don't know if I like wasn't paying close enough attention when they were explaining it towards the beginning, because they do kind of have like a little montagey explanation of it towards the beginning. But like the fact that, you know, his wife is potentially connected to his consequences from that, and like everything that's happening here is because of that, and blah blah. That's something I guess I just didn't initially realize the first time. I kind of almost watched the movie the first time going through, being like, he intended on having a fun horror night for the show, and it actually ended up being like more fun than they bargained for.
Mm-hmm.
That can be explained by this whole cult aspect, I guess. But me, I just was like, oh, they accidentally pulled somebody in. Like, you know, they summoned they Ouija board one bad demon in, and they're fucked now. So like, I don't know. Like, can you kind of contextualize the cult thing a little bit?
Yeah, I would love to. And I think just to add to that, I mean, I don't think that you are alone in that experience on a first time watch, because again, the first 15 minutes of the movie, because I got so immersed in it again today, I've watched 4 or 5 times because I had to go back and I was like, wait, there was stuff I was supposed to be looking for. I know it's here. I saw it before. So I watched the intro a couple of times, and they mention his association with the Grove, but the way that they do it, you know, they talk about him being a radio guy. There's some pretty cool stuff, like on the newspaper clip where they show that Jack got the job. The first paragraph talks about how the job was only available because the last host died in a freak elevator accident in the building. So it's like, even there, it's like it's his whole opportunity was probably created by what he did with the cult. But it's very subtle. It's behind. You have to pause it. That newspaper clipping is up there for like maybe a second. Like, you have to go through and pause. And I was looking for something else. There's actually one of the magazine covers on the bottom third. When he comes back, it says the UBC movie of the week, Hail Abraxas, which is the demon that will come in. And I knew that was there. I had just caught it. I got lucky my second viewing and saw it there. So I was trying to find that, but I couldn't remember where it was. So I was like, let me pause this. Maybe it was in this newspaper clipping. It wasn't. But I found even more cool info in there about how this guy weirdly plummets to his death in an elevator accident. So probably that's how Jack got the job. But sorry, were you gonna ask something, interject something in there?
I was just gonna say, so I mean, like, kind of to make sense of it, I guess, or what the movie tries to put together for you is that Desmalchin's character, the main guy, the host, was not doing as well in his career as what he thought as what he wanted to. So he became a part of some weird cult, and then promised, or like, I don't know what, he asks for their help and they demand a sacrifice, I guess. Is that how it goes?
Essentially,
sacrifice ends up unbeknownst to him, I guess, right? I don't think he willingly gave his wife up, but it seems like his wife ended up being his sacrifice to be successful. And I mean, shit, what you said, that part that I didn't even know about or catch, if what you said was true, I mean, it looks like more people got sacrificed. I mean, also the entirety of the cast pretty much gets sacrificed, right?
Yeah.
Like, he makes a lot of sacrifices for his career.
Everybody including his own career at the end. He finally gets that #1 spot, but he'll never get to work again. But yeah, no, the way you laid it out is what is going on. So he's part of the Grove, which as we're talking about this, I'll probably go into a little bit of detail, because that is based, I will say, loosely on the Bohemian Grove, a club that just rounded up their vacation for the year 2024 about 2 weeks ago. So we'll see what they had in store. But the Bohemian Grove, it's a thing. It's a real club. Started in the late 1800s. But essentially, this grove is a stand-in for that. And what they're saying is that, as Danny pointed out, he was a well-known WGN radio host who was trying to beat Carson. And they mention in his little intro that he's very successful early on. And then they mentioned, Danny, that he signs with UBC, which at that moment, if you remember, that's where he's shaking hands with that big president guy. And that's after that moment is when they start talking about how he can't catch Carson and things start to go bad for him, right? In that scene, there's an audible Easter egg that you don't catch right away, but they make direct reference to it at the very end when he's right before he goes through all of that. You hear one of the reporters say, what did you sacrifice to get here?
Right.
Which is sort of a normal thing, right? Funny way to phrase it, certainly, but an easy enough thing to overlook the first time. Like, hey, Jack, look over here, Jack, what did you sacrifice to get here? And it's like, oh, that's a funny way to phrase that. Okay. But the idea then, to really spoil heavy, when we go at the very end, right after the shit has hit the fan and he's kind of in his limbo state and he's reliving certain events, it goes back to that UBC thing. And when the reporter says, Jack, what did you sacrifice to get here? The president says he's about to make his biggest sacrifice is yet to come. And then immediately he's transitioned into the Grove. So I believe the idea is that this UBC company somehow or another connected to the Grove. They mentioned in the story that presidents, politicians, artists, all kinds of very influential people are part of this Grove. And over time, they will show you that the same Abraxas priest is in that Grove cult. So, yeah, well, it looks like the whole thing is all tied together. Like, as Danny pointed out, it starts out sort of exactly the way you experienced it the first time. I think that's the way you're meant to take it in. Like, this is just a host. He's trying to do a spooky Halloween night on Halloween. Little do we know that the demon that is possessing this child is actually the host's demon friend coming to collect his due, right? That's right. Kind of how I have taken it throughout the ride. And so, yeah, they lay out that Bohemian Grove stuff. Oh, sorry. Not the Bohemian Grove. Not the Bohemian Grove. The Grove.
The Grove.
Completely different. Okay?
Of course.
Completely not the same thing. But the one other little Easter egg as we start, because just while we're talking about the intro, there's another really cool moment that you'll absolutely miss, but kind of gives away what happens with Christu later. When he has that first biggest episode ever with his unfortunately dying wife on screen, there's a moment where she whispers, "I love you, darling," or something like that. And he mouths his response back. But if you notice that, Danny, on a rewatch, you'll see he mouths, "I love you too, Minnie." So even then, like, he calls her Minnie. You just don't see it. Maybe I didn't watch this with subtitles. Maybe it gives it away if you're watching it with subtitles. But it's just a cool thing again on another, because in a few scenes later, you're gonna have Christu being like, "Is there a Minnie?" And he and Demulchin's a good actor, because when you know what to look for, you can clearly see him be like, "Oh shit, what did he just say?" And then he's quick, like, "What about is there like a Maury or a Molly?" Like, he pivots very quickly. Shout out to him while we're talking about him. I hope he gets more lead roles. He's been like a character actor, funny guy. So good here.
Did you watch the superhero movie that he was in? What the fuck was it?
Was it he in? Are you talking about the Suicide Squad?
He was the polka dot guy. Yeah. Did you like him in that? I can't even remember that far back. I don't even know if I actually saw that movie, to be honest.
That movie jumped the shark for me, but I feel like he is the heart and soul of that movie.
Even then.
If you remember, he's the one who has like mommy issues. So like I think they get him to finally like conquer the bad guy by envisioning that the giant starfish is his mother. So like there's some depth. I mean, he's played for laughs, but like there's some depth to his character, and in a sense, I I feel he was one of the backbone characters of that movie. So yes, that is one where you're like, dude, this guy's so good, you know. And he, the first time I think I remember seeing him was in The Dark Knight as the guy that Batman captures or that Two-Face captures. Remember?
Yeah,
he's a criminally insane. You're gonna torture a sick person, and he's just
yeah.
How far he's come, man.
I really enjoy him. He was great throughout all this. You were talking about I guess it is in the intro, right? Or like the prelude to all this, the startup to the actual night, that happens on Late Night with the Devil. And it shows his wife coming on, like dying of cancer, and he interviews her. And like you said, he says, "I love you, Minnie," or whatever in that scene, blah, blah, blah. We were talking about how this all being set in the 70s kind of makes it feel a little better. If this were current day, taking place in current day, like you would see him do this with his wife and be like, oh my God, like this is the most clout hungry, disgusting thing to do. Have your fucking wife on your television show like this, blah, blah, blah. But having it be in the 70s and him doing that, my head wasn't there. We're the guys to call that kind of shit out naturally nowadays. But it's just something about the setting. It's like it felt more wholesome. It felt more real. Whatever. I mean, obviously, the behind the scenes of it all is that he sacrificed his wife.
Yeah.
So it is shitty. But you feel it's more convincing because of all that. Like nowadays, I would like one of us would be like X'd out. That lady don't even have cancer.
Yep. Take the do-rag off or whatever. Take the bandana off. Let's see her. I can see some hair under there. Yeah.
Right. So that scene was pretty interesting. Even to start with, to see that, I thought that like, if this were to happen today, it would just be like a clout hungry motherfucker. Like people would hate him for this.
And you do get a moment of that at the very end when he pauses the frame by frame of the exorcism when they're rewatching it at the very end, and he's like, pause it, and he sees the ghost of his wife with her hand on his shoulder. And that's at that moment, that's when Carmichael, who shout out fellow egg Carmichael Haig, I feel like he was the insert for us. Like Gus is the audience, but then Carmichael was the dude pressing X to doubt on everything. And he, they were both bald, so I was like, dude, Carmichael and Gus is basically Danny and Kev on the set right now. We're just trying to entertain the crowd while also being a bit of a they even call Carmichael a curmudgeon.
You're Carmichael and I'm Gus. That's the dynamic here. Yes.
Not all the time. But yeah, he at one point Carmichael, he calls him out. He's like, did you really think bringing up Madeline one more time might save your dead show? So there's that one moment at the very end where the skeptic among us is like, you piece of shit, you dragged your wife out here again. So like I didn't even probably always felt that way. I didn't until today. That's why, again, I kid you not, guys, this movie is like one of those little Russian dolls where it's just like there's just layers upon, you keep opening it up, there's just more shit inside, but it's good shit. Well, you know what? I'll pivot to one of the other characters that I thought was interesting, Christu. We talked about this a little bit in the pre-show, but this guy, like the mystery of Christu in the first third of the movie, I thought was pretty well done. It keeps you wondering. There are tons of clues that he's completely full of shit throughout the majority of that, right? You have there's the Barry guy who's being way too funny. Like he doesn't feel like an audience member, right? And then Leo, another favorite, the sleazy producer, piece of shit. At one point, he's like, oh, you like the lights? Of course, I'll take credit for it, as he's lighting a cigarette. He's like, what do you think about our guy Barry? So like that tells you right there, like Barry was a plant. Later on in the movie, Carmichael is interviewing those two women. And they say, oh, yeah, there was a lady walking around asking questions. It was that same lady that helped Christu when he got sick. And so Carmichael's over here like, oh, okay, this dude's a charlatan. And Leo calls him a charlatan during the first commercial break. So like there are all these little things where it's like he is faking it. he drops his accent when the real demon hits him with his only true vision of the night. It's so intense. And I didn't notice this the first time. Actually, a different reviewer pointed this out to me. Somebody else had to tell me. I watched the movie 3 times. I didn't catch it on my own because he's yelling. But when he's yelling the mini stuff, there's no more fake bullshit Christu accent. So I just
love
thought
little
that
things
was cool.
like that. Yeah.
Did you catch go ahead. I was just going to ask you like what you thought about Christu the first time around and if it changed at all the second time.
Well, I was going to say first off that like dSmolchin is the only, I mean, I don't want to diminish any of these people's career. They're doing better than I am. But he's like the only like big name, obviously, dSmolchin.
Big name, small chin.
Big name, small chin. So yeah, Christu is Faisal Bazi, I think is his name. Okay, I see him here. I liked the character, and I like that's my favorite moment of like thinking about a classic. If I were to think back to a skit that they would do on a 70s late night TV show for Halloween or whatever, it would be the Christu thing. It's like the Miss Cleo thing, you know, it's that shtick. We've seen it before. You try to connect with your otherworldly relatives and shit and keeps guessing the wrong thing over and over again. Like, I loved all that. And then the moment it breaks is what makes it fun. Like when he gets the real taste of the demon shit going on, and like the black, I mean, let me be real. Vomit scenes in movies, love them.
Nice.
Love me a good vomit scene, okay? Like in Team America, one of the most scenes that stick out in my head is when he leaves the bar out of the back door or whatever, goes out into the alleyway and does this. They do this like 10-minute puking scene of the puppet just throwing up in the alley. There's something about it. I don't know. It's always a spectacle, right? And his black sludge vomit was a pretty cool moment as well.
Got me hyped with ready to watch Alien Romulus this weekend. But yeah, it was good. And the other thing I liked about the Christu side was, if you were coming into this, maybe again as a skeptic, thinking that maybe am I going to get some kind of M. Night Shyamalan twist at the end where this has all been a fuckery? Like it really shows some validity in Carmichael. Like it shows that he is a worthy adversary to this whole thing, right? Like it shows his skill set, which gets even more like towards the end. Like Carmichael, I think, really makes this whole thing when he has that scene with Gus that we'll talk about, I'm sure, here pretty soon. But
yeah,
I love that whole thing because Christu and him getting, you know, kind of diced apart by Carmichael leaves that seed of doubt for anybody who's like, well, yeah, I'm not buying any of this demon stuff anyway. There's probably going to be some Scooby-Doo twist where you find out these guys are just weird and they're doing weird shit on TV for their cult or whatever. And you're like, you know, so it leaves you that opening of being like, well, maybe there's some other story going on. So I really like that because it kept the mystery going as far as like what's going on, what are we going to see? And then you have the fate of Christu being talked about. You know, people start to whisper about it behind the scenes, like whether or not it's real.
Dead on arrival or whatever.
Yeah.
They're like, we're not going to tell everything's fine. He's doing great.
That's one of my favorite comedic bits when dSmolchin, she's like, fuck. And then he looks back at Gus, who clearly saw him overreact, and he like whispers to Leo, like, don't tell anyone, especially not Gus. And it's like, bro, you don't think, you know, it was sort of one of those things where like it was an obvious moment of a dude under pressure cracking, and it was just very subtle. I love that. I think it's a fine line. We've talked about it in other programs, whether it's a horror movie or something that's meant to be tense. Like comedy can really let too much air out of the balloon, in my opinion. So I thought this was very good at having nice little subtle, like little breather moment. Felt like a save room in a Resident Evil game where you're like, all right, cool, I can take a breath, and then now we're back at it.
Right. And it's really like, Interestingly enough, it lines up with the commercial breaks are our breather moments. like they would be in normal television. The commercial breaks they take in the movie are our moments to be like, okay, these people are actually human living through this experience. And they're kind of talking about it throughout all those parts.
Yeah, and you get the comedy from that, like with the lights, and he's like, Leo, that was your idea on the lights, right? And he's like, well, if you liked it, yeah, it was my idea. And then later he's like, Phil, what the fuck's going on with these lights? And it's just like, that's a clue, but also like it's a good laugh as well. It's like, all right, dude, you guys put a lot of time and thought into making a very cohesive story where so much of what's going on is actually serving a purpose. You know, it's not super exposition heavy dialogue. It does have its moments where they're you know, they gotta be a little on the nose, but a lot of times it's a real conversation that two people making this show would have, but it's still giving us the information that we need to move things along. So I agree with you. It was fitting that we got the break during the commercial break. It worked out well with the pacing. Another thing, while we're talking about hidden stuff, because it does happen in these commercial break scenes, all the different times. Danny, did you catch, and I'm certain I still haven't caught all of them, but did you notice how many times they would splice in his dead wife into the background during this movie?
Like, the only times I really noticed the dead wife was like the parts where they make it apparent, really. And like, that was obviously, again, me being too into it and not necessarily trying to find all that. But like, there's a part where he's going frame by frame and he looks at the tape and then they see his wife. And there's like the big version of her where she's like actually standing there, like touching him. It's kind of corny or whatever. But like, even this, like the frame before that, you see his wife's face, like more of a jarring, realistic face. She's like right up in the screen, like as a blip in the face of somebody else or whatever, or like in somebody's head or whatever. And I don't know, that maybe was the only time where I saw it where I felt like maybe not everybody did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I'm sure that there were plenty of those moments.
I think there's probably a few more that I haven't seen either. But yeah, there were a couple of those, like you mentioned. I think there's one when they're during a break. I think she's in one of the monitors that you can see. Like, it's just kind of lower left frame, right? And the two characters are talking, like center right middle. So like your eyes are over here, but down here there's a silhouette of a ghost. You got really no reason to be looking over there. And I think there's another one where she shows up in a mirror or something like that. So there are these few little situations where, whether it's in the background or just spliced in, like you mentioned, in a frame by frame, where they're just like, boom, here's a quick glimpse of the ghost. And I thought it was funny. I wanted to get your opinion on that too. It was a weird moment. They did the frame by frame, and then they have like that one. Speaking of frame by frames, they have basically a solo frame where it cuts to what looks like the real life him sitting, and you can see like they have an actress wearing a glove or something. Like, there's someone actually holding his shoulder for like half a second, because it's one thing to see it in the monitor when it happened 10 minutes ago, but they do the weird cut as if she's still right there holding onto his shoulder in that moment. And I was like, what? That's weird, but they probably just had the prop and wanted to use it, and then your editor was like, right, this looks cool, brother. We're gonna splice this in. Looks good.
Yeah. That's kind of funny. No, but I'm sure that there are so many of those moments throughout the film that you'd have to fucking comb with a fine tooth. Did I say that right? A fine tooth comb. There's just so many of those moments, that you can miss. But I like that. Sprinkled in there a little bit. We were talking about this Carmichael guy here. I wanted to ask you. He was a pretty fun character. I enjoyed him too. He's Kevin's stand-in, the X'd out guy. And
the curmudgeon.
So there is a bit, it's like the second, you've got the intro, then you've got the Chris Do part, and then you've got, I guess the next major beat is when Gus and Carmichael sit down and do the hypnotism thing, right? I guess that's like the next big like set piece or whatever.
So they have they do their performance, right? June talks to, oh man, I can't think of the little girl's name now.
Oh, does that happen before the Carmichael thing?
Yeah, because he does his Gus thing as a way to prove, because he like says mean things about Dr. June. He's like, you're hypnotizing this child and it's bad for her health.
Yes, that's why he went into it. Okay,
yep. And so he's like, to prove it to you all. And then he's like, Gus, I'm going to volunteer you.
Right. So I guess before we get into the Carmichael and Gus part, then, like I was going to say, that whole bit with the girl, I don't know. Yeah, let's come back to that because I feel like that does wraps right into the end and with what happens to them in the finale there. So I think we can come back to that comfortably and I can keep on my point. I guess why it's fresh in my head with the Carmichael stuff. Are we supposed to believe, okay, as the audience, and I didn't really think about this until like we began talking and blah, blah, but does Carmichael successfully hypnotize everyone and we're supposed to believe that he can realistically hypnotize somebody in a real world, an audience of people? Or although they look, because it's a plot point where they look back at the footage to see what was real and what was not. And they go back and they look at what happened with the girl previously being possessed. And they're like, that's real. But the whole thing with Gus and Carmichael, you see that going back and they're just playing pretend. Is it the demon or Abraxas or whatever's going on here interfering with the whole situation that is enabling him to do the whole stunt to begin with? You know what I mean? Because like realistically in the real world, we know that a guy can't pull out a fucking clock, a pocket watch and fucking spin some black and white and make you obey his every command. It's just not a real thing.
And to have everyone in the live studio audience and theoretically us at home seeing what the hypnotized person is seeing. Because if you haven't seen it and you're still just with us for the ride, worms start coming out of Gus's neck and then he pulls open his stomach and it's just full of worms. So in the storyline, everyone got hypnotized enough, or almost everyone, to see what he was suggesting to Gus. So I didn't think about it the way you put it, Danny, where maybe Abraxas had some influence on it. There was, so at the very end of that, when they poll the audience, and I guess there's like one or two people who claim that, which would probably somebody like me, some kind of asshole who wouldn't be willing to admit it. Like, oh yeah, I didn't see the worms either, pal. But right. There is one moment that, again, I did not catch in a first watch. But what's her name? Lily, the girl when she's not possessed. Mm-hmm. While the whole thing is going on, at one point the girl looks to Dr. June and says, she's giggling and she goes, "Why is Gus being so silly?" So it's sort of inferring that the demon possessed girl is not hypnotized. Like she is not. So
she's just seeing him be a weirdo. Yeah.
She's just seeing what everybody else ends up seeing when they replay the footage. So either the demon was just seeing through all of it, or it could be, like you said, the only reason it was amplified enough. Because Carmichael says something as he's like, "Well, luckily you're all a suggestible bunch," which, I mean, based on what you've seen and now what you're seeing again, fair enough. But I think there could be something to your thought, Danny. That's going to make me go through again with that fine-tooth comb, and try to see if they're like, maybe that's part of the whole spiel too. Because remember, Christou was a charlatan until the demon wanted to talk through him. Like that seemed to be very real. So maybe the demon did, and he does do that. There's that whole part at the end before Jack does what he does, where they are spinning a hypnotist wheel again, and he's like, "Turn off your televisions, turn it off." So like maybe Abraxas was in on that the whole time. That's a good one.
I kind of feel that way. I guess I didn't realize the girl saying the thing. That kind of puts a little kink in my idea there. Because yeah, you would think if she says like, why is he acting so silly or whatever, that like, yeah, she's seeing through it, and everybody else isn't seeing through it, and she's seeing through it because of the influence of the demon or whatever. But at the same time, I feel like she could still say that and have that dialogue and it be also her and like the demon influencing the whole thing.
Yeah,
I feel like they can coexist.
I do too, and there's actually, as we're talking about this, this brings together another point I was going to bring up separately, but this kind of ties your theory together. At one point, Carmichael and the little girl, he's not really talking to her, but she interjects. At one point, June says something, and Carmichael's like, "Oh, I disagree. Abraxas in the Gnostic religion was a showman." And he even points out that's where the magician's word abracadabra comes from. And the girl interrupts him, and she says abracadabra, and that's another one. If you remember, she kills Carmichael at the very end by saying abracadabra, and then he catches on fire. So it is possible that the showman Abraxas, the guy who magicians are evoking whenever they use their go-to magic word, it could very well, Danny, be that the reason she can see through it is because it's the same magic that the demon is amplifying through him. I hadn't thought of that before, but now that we've talked about it and added some of the other evidence pieces, I think that could be there. I got another round of Easter eggs to go hunting for.
Well, there you go. See, you heard it here first. Brain busting theories, okay? But I guess, yeah, okay, so that's that whole Carmichael scene. I thought that was interesting. What do you think about the I guess it's the star of the show, right? The little girl and that whole jazz. So do you remember what your favorite part was about the whole the first encounter with the demon right before the Carmichael and the Gus thing, where they're I mean, I guess like I'm not even sure if I understand the whole backstory there. Maybe you can bring some of that together. Like, what are we supposed to think is going on between DeSmallchin, the doctor, and the girl behind the scenes? Like, what are the dots we're supposed to connect?
Yeah, that is a good one. And there's a big moment in that back and forth with June and the child the first time, where she says, while she's possessed, she says to Jack, "I know who you are." Or he says, "I don't believe we've ever met," to the demon. She's like, "We met amongst the tall trees," which again, reference to the grove from before. Mm-hmm. And so, but my favorite part, well, I guess I'll answer your second question first. I think what we're supposed to be piecing together from that is, again, there's that grove tie-in. I believe that the demon that's possessing the child is the same one that Jack made that deal with when he didn't really realize what he was selling in order to get what he wanted. And then this sort of answers my your part one question, because my favorite part of that conversation is when the demon starts to call out the fact that Dr. June and Jack have been bumping uglies behind the scenes, when he's like, "You remember what happened to his last whore?" And that part, again, props to the editors, you know, the way they spliced the audio. The actress, I thought, did a great job. I thought, you know, full stop there. The girl who played this role, I thought, was phenomenal. The way she was able to switch in and out. But the stuff they did with the voice really added another level of creepiness to it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. They definitely had that going. I'm trying to think if there was like anything specific in that first. I mean, it's something with these demons. It's like all the way back to fucking The Exorcist, where they're like, "Fucking your mother sucks cocks in hell." Like, what's up with them all?
Yeah,
like,
right. They're all deviants.
Yeah, you guys fuck behind the scenes. I know you do. Like, whatever.
Went up the hill to fuck each other's brains out. Like, she's just singing that shit till she gets slapped. I guess the other memorable thing, probably, which is another exorcism kind of trope, was when she starts to do the Latin, and then the demon girl's like mocking her, finishing her prayer for her.
Yeah.
Like, okay, yeah, we're checking all the boxes on this scene, pal.
Yeah, so no, that girl did a crazy job. It only gets crazier, I guess, as it goes along, right? But so what is the deal there though? Like, do they really iron that out to where like, so is the girl like able to talk to demons? Is that what we're supposed to believe? Or she has a connection with specifically Abraxas? Like, that's the part that that was kind of foggy to me a little bit, even upon a second viewing, is like, I don't know if we're supposed to believe that Desmalchin just found this late. I mean, they talk about how they knew each other prior. So like he's been setting this up for a while that he's going to have her on the Halloween show. So he's known that I just don't get it, I guess. That bit of it.
Yeah, and I think for what it's worth, I do think there is a layer of like vagueness that I think there are some things inferred, but not completely answered to a degree of certainty, because June at one point even says she doesn't believe that the girl is possessed by Abraxas himself, but rather by a lesser demon that works for Abraxas. So that essentially she's not the main devil, she's just one of the devil's lackeys. But as I understand it, this is the way I took it, because and I'll lay out, I guess, some of my evidence before I throw the theory out. The first scene of footage that you see, remember when they have the old TV and they kind of zoom in on it, and then you have that deep gravel voice guy who's like, it's the 1970s, and the first footage that pops up is that Abraxas priest saying it is done, which is also like the final words of, it's the final thing that shows up on stage after the ritual sacrifice is finished, because essentially that's what happened when Jack stabbed the possessed girl with the dagger, with the ceremonial dagger that we all knew it was Chekhov's dagger. Like they talk about it like 15 minutes in. They're like, hey, my favorite. Gus is like, hey, man, there's like a dagger back there. It's kind of freaking me out. It's good. But so the way I see it is, at some point 5 years ago, at one of the yearly Grove meetings, Jack made a deal with somebody, asked for them to do whatever they could to help in the club so he could finally surpass Johnny Carson. After the ghost fully takes control, starts to kill some people, and it looks like Jack walks away, right? We have that weird little reset, and then Jack is going through some dream scenarios, and we revisit him at the UBC, and then they show him on his knees drinking a cup of what I imagine is blood, and people are making a bunch of animal sounds. The Abraxas priest is in there again. He's actually the main guy talking to Jack. So it tells me that those two are connected. Also, the guy in the cheap skeleton suit, the costume that Jack makes fun of, if you notice, that guy is in every Grove scene as well in that costume. So
what the fuck?
It's showing me that some of these cult people are there. They're keeping an eye on him. I don't know what.
Why is he in a skeleton costume all the time?
Yeah, right. It's just, yeah, exactly. It's just like, why was he in the skeleton costume? I think it's just their way of saying like, he was there.
Yeah, right.
So what I think happened is that the Abraxas cult happens to be worshiping the same or a similar dark entity as the Grove. And when it's the demon that tells Jack, we met amongst the tall trees, in my opinion, not the girl. And so basically, his deal was, I'll get to be number one. Not only did they take his wife, but also I think the final pentultimate, because we don't really know. For all we know, he could have gone back to the Grove a second time, tried to make a new deal. Because remember, the guy he replaced dropped out of an elevator and died. So like, what deal did he make with the devil just to get this job in the first place? Maybe that's the one that took his wife. And maybe the second deal,
he's made more deals,
was to get to the top, and this was the cost, was for him to be the one to finish the sacrifice. Because the other part of this, I'll try to wrap it up. Sorry, I know it's a long-winded theory, but at the beginning when they played June's tape, she tells you that this Abraxas church that was just a house burnt down and everyone in it died except for Lily. And so what I think was that was a ritual where they were bringing out the demon, and Lily was unfortunately like the host that they chose. The person that they kidnapped chose to be the host for this demon. And so 5 years ago or whatever, it was just a demon they were praying to, making deals to. This is the manifestation. This is the chickens coming home to roost. And then Jack's final payment was he was going to have to finish the ritual, because that's another thing they mention, is that theoretically anyone who witnesses the ritual of Abraxas is now under his influence. So I think what the underlying story was that hundreds of thousands of Americans got possessed by the devil that night, and that's why it's, you know, lost media and all this stuff. So I think that is sort of the connection, that it's all the same demon coming to settle up with old Jack.
Right. So interesting. Yeah. And I mean, the demon thing really, I guess we can talk about, we're in spoilers, so it's not like I have to worry about the ending, right?
Oh yeah.
I think I might have told you this the first time we talked about it, but I feel I felt less this way. Like I felt less offended by it on the second viewing because I just am pleased with the movie. But the first time I viewed it, when we get to the end scene where all the shit's going down, I mean, the demon starts killing everybody, essentially. It's like the last, 10 minutes of the movie or whatever. Some of that is where I started to like, what the fuck? Like, you enjoy it as you're watching it all go down, but it is kind of like, so far it's just supernatural, like ghosty demon things. And then it kind of like turns into it's like almost cosmic horror-y, like what the demon thing ends up being, because it's fucking her head splits open and a sun essentially comes out of the lady's head. And like before, when they're talking to her and interviewing her or whatever, it's like more akin to The Exorcism. Whereas at the end, it's like a fucking solar flare demon thing that's cracking people's necks and
yeah. She's got beams coming out of both arms too. Like she's half like kaiju by the end. She's
like doing the whole fucking getting the electricity from the TVs and shit, like fucking Storm or something.
Yeah, dude, she's a Dragon Ball villain in the last 5 minutes.
For real though, for real. But that kind of, I don't know if it's because once she does that, then I'm like, oh, what the hell? And then I start being more critical of everything. But it was like, once she did that, I'm like, what the fuck? And then the Gus kill looks kind of janky when they do it. Like, as much as I love like how he gets the whole thing goes down, because like when he's in the is that his name? No. What's the guy that interviews with Gus?
Carmichael. Yep.
When he's in the Carmichael thing and he's about to get into it, he says like he foreshadows his death or whatever. He says, my wife likes the way my head sits on my shoulders. And then I believe he says something else about like, don't make my head spin or something, right?
Yeah. He says, I hope you don't plan on. And then Carmichael goes, making it spin? Well, I plan on making everyone's head spin in here. But yeah, no, it was a wonderful foreshadow. So you get that pop of, you're like, oh, she just snapped his neck, the head spin thing. Oh my God.
Like, looks kind of goofy.
Yeah. And you know the stunt actor had to have a lot of fun, like Pratt falling into the coffee table right there. But yeah, it was just sort of like,
it's like a rubber necking. It's like it like stretches his neck and head out and throws him on the ground.
And then he just collapses forward. It reminds me of The Departed. There's one throwaway scene where Jack shoots a couple and like the actress like falls over sideways for whatever reason. And he's just like, she fell funny, it's like they just left it in and had him comment about it instead of like redoing it. It kind of felt like that, where it's like, oh, okay. I mean, I get it. It's a practical effect. You get what you get sometimes, you get what you ask for. But I did think it was jarring at the first time. you're so what the fuck that maybe you don't
because
notice.
it just happens quick. It's kind of like a tonal shift very quickly all at once.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you thought you're on a lazy river, but it ends up there's a cliff at the bottom, and it's actually a water roller coaster. You're like, oh shit, bro, what? Hang on, I wasn't prepared. And because even the way June goes, like, you know, she gets hung up by her chain. Again, it foreshadowed because it's the same chain that she tries to power of Christ compels you. Like, even those little details, they were all so well fleshed out. But in the execution, I was kind of glad that they treated that scene like a car wreck, and they were just like, boom, boom, boom. All right, cool, it's over. Jack's out of here.
Yeah,
let's go back to the weird, spooky, creepy shit.
You don't have a lot of time to dwell and think about it. Yeah, so you're right. They probably handled it the best way that they could do it. Interesting. But what about the ending then there? So, you know, we get her flipping out and she ends everybody. Carmichael gets burnt up to a fucking weird old rubbery crisp.
After offering, after calling Satan the Lord of the Flies, which I love, that great literary reference there, and then offers the devil his check for $500,000. Did you notice that?
Yeah, and it just the check just like catches on fire and disappears. Like, yep.
I thought it was a perfect ending for Carmichael. The way he goes out like that.
But I guess it's Carmichael, Gus, and then the girl, the doctor or whatever.
Yep.
And then we get the, you know, going through Dismulchin's head about revisiting some of the other scenes. And it ends with like a, you know, I guess it's like pulling away, right? The camera's pulling away from the incident that is Dismulchin with the dagger in the what would be the clue equivalent here? Dismulchin with a dagger in the studio.
There it is. Yes, that's right. And I love the way they set that up. I mean, once you saw, because he, like you mentioned, he does the whole he's in his mind thing. He's reliving events like, hey, I've been here before. Then the next thing you know, he's in the grove. They're reliving that. And this door opens and it's his dying wife on her deathbed. And that's where they really hash it out, where she specifically says, like, did they tell you you could have it all? You know, did you? I was the price that you had to pay. And he, at that point, he says, I didn't know. If I had known, I wouldn't have done it. But then, you know, he tells her he loves her. And she says, if you really do, then put me out of my misery. And so he takes the dagger, puts his beloved wife out of his misery. And as Danny pointed out, like, then they cut to, and it's actually June, or not June, it's actually Lily. And start to pan out, and he drops the dagger. He realizes what has happened. And this is another cool moment. If you remember in the Gus scene, Carmichael throws us all for a loop because he pretends like, oh, this wasn't supposed to be it. Oh no, I'm not in control here anymore. Remember, he's snapping his fingers and nothing happens. And then he goes, dreamer, here, awake. Like he's in some kind of anime or something.
Right. And the other funny part about that, he's the skeptics guy that's saying like everybody else is bullshit. Then he does the fucking it's like, okay.
But one of my favorite parts to the ending is after we see the hypnotist wheel where David Dismulchin's like, turn your TV off, turn it off. And he finally concedes. He finally falls into the hypnotism. That's another reason I think you might be onto something with your whole Carmichael's thing was being amplified by Abraxas. Because how did Abraxas get Jack to complete the ritual? Through hallucination.
Yeah.
Through that same hypnotism. Convinced him that that little girl was his wife, and that the one way he could make up all the bad things he did to her would be to put her out of her misery. He buys into it, hook, line, and sinker. And when they cut to, and it's the chaos, and he just stabbed the young demonic girl, he keeps repeating the phrase, dreamer, here, awake. He mutters it to himself over and over again until they cut to black. And I just thought that was awesome. Like, that was his last. He's like, snap me out of it, dude. And I just thought that was so cool. Just so many things they set up and then paid off. It's just, I get called a curmudgeon. all the time. And so I just love we got to say nice things about a movie for almost the entire movie's runtime. It's been great.
So in the end, do you think that because there's a lot of things I thought about the Lily or whatever and the head splitting and the sun thing. I thought it was kind of weird, whatever. But if he wouldn't have stabbed her, would that mean that there'd just be a sun head demon fucking floating around, fucking everybody up? Or like, did he do what the Grove wanted him to in some way? Like, is someone else winning is what I'm wondering, because they brought the demon in, they did the whole thing, and then he completed the he took the demon out at the end too. So like, is the head of the Grove like now immortal or something? Like, I'm just wondering because it seems strange. Like, if they wanted to worship this guy, then they're probably not happy at the end, right? Because they just took their little demon lord out. But for some reason, I think if they're puppeteering the entire situation prior to that, I'm assuming they got what they wanted. They wanted that outcome.
I think you're right. And that's where I've heard it alluded to the idea that, and I can't remember if it's worded specifically like this in the film or if I've just heard it theorized enough that I'm kind of taking from one place and putting it in here. So don't completely quote me on this, but what I believe it's mentioned that anyone who witnesses a ritual of Abraxas would be influenced by him. So I think you're right, Danny. I think at the end of the day, the Grove needed him to sort of finish the ritual, and doing it on the highest rated late night show of all time, right? The one night it beats Carson, then that means thousands, if not millions. Yeah, just a maximum output on now. All these people can be influenced by Abraxas because they all witnessed the ritual. So I think that's exactly what it was like, that's what they were getting out of him. He wants to be number one. Great. Well, we need to influence even more souls. So here we go. That's going to be our price. You can have your little top rating. It's going to cost you literally everything. And half the world will be doomed afterwards. So I don't know. Or maybe that's not it at all. And that's what's so fun about the movie. Mm-hmm. Like, it could just not be that. I don't know. Maybe.
There's this segment that those Weekly Planet dudes do when they review movies where like they say, if the game is on, which means like, are they going to make more movies out of this, whatever. And I feel like this is one typically that people, they like, if they reviewed this movie on their show, I don't think they'd be asking at the end, is the game on? Is this one of those? I don't think, like, are we witnessing the game being on with this movie where they're like, imagine they make a cinematic universe out of this, or like they evolve more spinoffs or like sequels out of this. I don't want them to, mind you. I think it's great where it is. They don't need to do more. But you know how Hollywood works and how this shit goes on. Like, could you theorize spinning different things out of this? Like, for instance, if what you just described is true, then that means that now in the 70s of this universe, there's hundreds of thousands of people potentially that are influenced, whatever that means, by this demon. Does that mean that there is, more story to tell?
Sequel bait, maybe. I get nervous about these because whenever I like something this much, part of me feels that unless you told this story and you already had more of the story in mind, just leave it alone, dude. Like, if there's more story to be told, great. I want to hear it. I want to see it. But if this just worked really well and somebody in a suit is like, hey, we could make more money if we retread this thing and do a newer version of it. No, please stay away, because
no.
There are certain concepts that I really love. So VHS, when that movie first came out, really loved it. I don't really remember much about the sequel, but it's something that kind of got franchised out that I wish wouldn't have. as a fan of independent filmmakers, I love the idea that a lot of people got to get their opportunity, get their name out there by directing one of the little shorts in a VHS movie. So it's not all bad. Like, I'm glad those things exist, but as a fan, just purely consumer, as a fan of the story, I didn't need a sequel, didn't want a sequel, won't be watching anymore. When it comes to something like this, maybe there's a way they could do it, but I'd be too afraid that they would want to stay in the theme and be like, oh, next time we're going to do a 90s and it's going to be straight Jerry Springer daytime television. That's big. You see what I'm saying?
That
Like, I'd be too afraid they'd like WandaVision this shit and try to, or Paranormal Activity, right? And be like, oh, well, we're going to do 7 of them. So what was the gimmick? The gimmick was it was in the 70s. All right. Well, what did they do in the 80s? Let's do a Miami Vice Abraxas. And then in the 90s, we'll have Jerry Springer or Oprah or whatever. And I'm just like, no, stop. Just
none of that.
Just hire the director or the writer to do something else. They clearly have some good ideas. Don't force them back into this alley. Just give them some money and tell them to make a good story. That sounds like a good idea.
Sounds like a great idea, honestly. But yeah, no, overall, I would say good movie, recommend. Am I giving it? I mean, let's see. Rotten Tomatoes gives it a 97 on the tomato meter. That's the tomato meter is the critic review, right? And then an 81 with the audience. So that would be the normies like me and you. I think it did a little worse on IMDb. IMDb got like a 7 out of 10.
Those AI review bombs that I said didn't exist before.
But I mean, 97 on the tomato meter on Rotten Tomatoes, not bad. I mean, that's fire, that's right up there with what do we got most popular right now. You got Twisters. The sequel to Twister right now is a 74% to the 97% that is Late Night with the Devil. So think about that, okay? Not even a sequel to Twister could beat this movie.
That's right, dude. And I'm good. I'm glad to hear that critic score because I always get nervous whenever I'm going to give something a high score. Like, am I being too nice about this? Am I going to regret this later when I find an even better movie? But I would give this one a 9 out of 10 just because of the rewatchability. Like I said, I've watched it a bunch of times. I still expect there's more stuff for me to find. And it's a story like we just spent 90 minutes kind of just discussing the lore and where we think it's going. Like, to me, that's a winner of a story right there. When you want to fill in those blanks yourself and be like, ooh, what? Like, this is a very immersive world. I wouldn't mind living in it for a couple hours and thinking about it and talking about it. To me, that's a win. I'll forgive some of the blemishes. Obviously, it's not a perfect movie. I very rarely, if ever, give a 10. And I'm leaving myself a little wiggle room by going 9 instead of 9.5. But absolutely, not only do I suggest this one, I think if you're a fan of horror movies and if you have a wide eclectic taste, I would say go ahead and buy it to support the people directly that made it and let them know that there's more room and time for them to do this again. But Danny, do you agree? Would this be a suggestion for you? You agree with those high ratings?
9 out of 10 for me too. I would say that's a pretty good place to put it. I don't know about the 0.5s. I guess I don't really mess with that very much. So 9 out of 10 sounds good to me. Would recommend. And like I said earlier in our chat, if you have a wife or a significant other that is maybe spooked easily, not into this kind of stuff, I really feel like the aesthetic of it and the ride of the whole thing really outweighs any kind of like, oh, I can't see it because I'm scared too easily or whatever. I think that pretty much no matter where your temperament falls when it comes to that kind of thing, you could watch this and enjoy yourself.
Agreed. I think you very, very well put, sir. I will just verbally retweet that. So, man, we have hit, like I said, a damn near a feature-length runtime ourselves talking about this movie. So I will just openly hand it off to you, Danny. If you have any more takes, thoughts, topics, I'd love to hear them. We don't have a time limit, but if not, now could be a good time to tell the folks at home where else they can find you.
Well, you can catch us over here on this thing right here behind me, the Clout Route, baby, where we talk about, you know, certainly less professional things and people over there on the Clout Route. But think of it like late night with the eggs instead of the devil. Okay, we do a comedy show where we like to, you know, stay timely with the news and make jokes, just like a late night TV show, just like it. So come check us out over there. Other than that, I love coming to Dweeb and having a good time, talking about movies and shit every once in a while, or TV shows even, I guess. Right?
Oh yeah,
The Boys was a big one that I've enjoyed chatting with you about too. So TV, movies, I'm here for it all.
I can't wait. And thank you again for joining me. It's always a blast. I love when we get to do this. As Danny mentioned, our other hobby usually involves us saying very mean but honest and correct things about people. So it was nice to be able to, yeah, exactly. It was nice to stay right all the time, but to actually be more positive about it this time. So yeah, like Danny said, Tuesday nights at 6, or, you know, if you're not into Sunday, you know, a little Sunday morning with some deviled eggs, you can come hang out with us, coffee and some clout on Sunday morning.
Deviled eggs, that's right.
And if you're a sports fan, come hang out with me Thursday nights and James, our other wonderful egg here at Dweeb. We go live on the Dweeb channel Mondays at 6, Wednesdays at 9, Bite Size Sports also live at 9. And go subscribe over there if you are into fantasy football as well. We got 3 live shows again running every week at Bite Size Sports. So tons of stuff coming. And since you're here with Danny and I, if you're here at this point listening to the two of us talk about movies, it might be a good time for me to remind some folks, Danny and I are in a movie as ourselves, in the Clout Route, feature-length indie horror film, currently out there in the film festival circuit. And one of these days, you all will get to see it. Lonely Legend by Noah, K-N-O-W, Noah. There you go. And we'll keep you in the loop there. But very excited to have our first foray, excuse me,
It would be my first 4-way too if we were.
That's for after we get that. Yeah, you see, we're also gonna be making some deals here soon. Once that thing, you know, this is just a preview to our future, Danny. Oh, but anyway, thank you all again. If you're still here watching, please like, subscribe on the way out. Leave us a comment. I know James and I are checking these things, and if you say something specifically to Danny, I see him 3 times a week. I'll make sure he hears it, and we'll get a message out back to you. But again, thank you, Danny, for joining me. I appreciate it. I will see you in a couple of days, sir. I'll see the rest of you the next time here on Dweeb. Y'all take care. Don't go summoning any owls in the tall trees, all right?